Wanyangyalam, Ngai Burumga Durawan, Ngai Goreng Goreng Ja. My name is Robert McLellan, and I am a Goreng Goreng person, and I come from Bundaberg. I would say I've had quite an interesting language journey that's spanned across quite a few years now, but as the years get on, probably back around 2016 or so would have been when we started to really engage with language a little bit more in depth in terms of myself and my community. However, but prior to that, my family, my community, we carried forward perceptions that our languages were lost, and the idea of reviving them or revitalizing them or bringing them back to life in one sense or another would be to no avail, because we didn't have the privileges that I now see, myself having an affiliation, with quite a few unis now, and even having simple things like university logins to access material and information in libraries and archives and other spaces, and even just journal articles, those old journal articles written about our languages. Well, we didn't even know those things existed. It was a whole different world. So to think that there was enough content to rebuild a language that hadn't been spoken for, more than perhaps 2 generations or so, that concept was completely foreign to us. So that's where that started back then. We started working with, we had the opportunities to work with linguists and all of that through the Indigenous Languages funding, through the ILA, which continues today, and they fund various language centres around the place. So it was quite humble beginnings in that respect. And I remember the first time hearing my language spoken was by a non-Indigenous linguist, and an older lady, still, very lovely lady, but it was just a bizarre feeling to think that to hear your language spoken by not one of your own people. And I reflect on that moment still today, and it was just quite a bizarre feeling at the time. But then to hear something spoken that was ours, something that we could be comfortable with, something that we could see ourselves in, that was a truly remarkable feeling. So then my journey continued on, and we just continued to do things with language, wrote books, did different performances, songs, dance, spoke, implementing it into like acknowledgement of country processes, starting to get more people in the community speaking it, children at schools, non-Indigenous community members also. We did different programs and projects where we'd get everyone up singing and dancing, and just that real communal sense where everyone could be proud of what was the first language of our community and our regions. My community extends from Bundaberg south to the Burrum River, where we neighbour with Butchulla and Cubby Cubby countrymen. We go north to Gladstone, beyond Gladstone to Raglan Creek, inland to about Rawbell or Three Moon, and then we cut in before Childers in the southwest. So it's a pretty big area of land, my country. And also within that region, there is an extremely diverse amount of languages that make up, there's about 12 or more different dialects of my language. I later became engaged with the University of Queensland to continue a lot of this language work, and I guess I sort of split into 2 areas. Predominantly, we focused a lot of our time, efforts and energy on working with language communities across Queensland to develop what is now the Graduate Certificate in Indigenous Language Revitalisation. And it's quite a profound feeling now to be able to say that, because it was a huge journey. It took a lot of work. It took a lot of consultation. We had we still have today an Indigenous-led steering committee. Yeah, there was a lot of time and effort that went into developing that, and I'm personally truly grateful for all of the work that others contributed, mob on their own languages. It's one of those programs that's really the quality of the program is what gets brought into it, and that's what communities are bringing to the program, to give them the tools and the skills that they need to continue to revitalise and make resources for their languages. Those things could be books, grammars, songs, all of those kind of things that really do make a difference. And on the other side of that, I'm also working with the Language Data Commons of Australia, which is led by the University of Queensland, but we have about 10 or so partners across different universities working to build a centralised archival repository system where we're identifying a lot of language materials, because we know in the context of Indigenous languages that much of our language material is dispersed all over the place. Sure, it's amassed in different collections, but it's dispersed, and up until now we've relied on the word of mouth really to find out where our language material is, and we can never truly be sure to have found it all. So that's a real challenge when you haven't had the continuity of your language carried across generations, but when it has been impacted by colonisation and your old people haven't been able to speak it or pass it on, that makes a big difference. And there's a lot of communities in that condition who are having to work with these materials and start to revitalise their languages. So I think it's incredibly important work, and something that I'm certainly proud of myself also. I know my grandmother was never able to speak her language, and she speaks about those old people whispering it, speaking very quietly, or when the policeman had come around on the bicycle, old people would tell them to run off to the back in the creek and just play very quietly and don't come back up until they tell them to. It was tough times then, and I think there was a fear. She always spoke about this fear from those old people that if those kids went to school and uttered any language, they'd be taken away, or these sort of things would happen. So that was really imposed. That fear was imposed upon our people. It's really quite disappointing to see the impacts of colonisation upon our languages, our cultures and identities as it extends through today. But I think one of the most significant things for me personally in my language journey and the privileges that I've had is hearing those stories from all those old people, and then coming back, and the full circle comes around when you find material and little hidden gems, and it clarifies what we knew when you see it documented a second way. And it's almost as if, I know it sounds funny to say, but it seems as if this is real stuff, and it's bizarre to think that we have this sense that Western research papers are the tool to validate that. I know it's not, but that's the world we believe, we've been brought up to. But it's certainly welcoming to see that that language sort of crossing over from what our oral histories are and what's being documented also. And it's an incredibly privileged space to walk the line between both of them, and a responsibility that I don't take lightly, and I know a lot of our mob working in this space also take that job very seriously. So it's a pretty special place to be in. I think in a revitalisation context, the use of music and song is incredibly important. It's incredibly important because it's the mode of which we can really engage with people and language learners of all different levels. Particularly, I think about a lot of the projects that I did with schools, primary schools, and the language that we teach them through song and actions as well, get them singing and dancing together. That was incredibly important because it stays in their memory. I think for us as mob, a lot of that language and a lot of the stories and important knowledges were passed down through song and story, and it's a way of retaining that information. So I think it's incredibly important. We'd use a lot of things like repetition, which is not uncommon for some of the songs that we'd find, particularly going back through those old materials and hearing old recordings, those old fellas and old women who've been recorded singing. You see different patterns. Ethnomusicology point of view, you do start to see those patterns, particularly in the sort of central to southeast Queensland region. Our languages are somewhat similar, quite distinct, but somewhat similar in their systems and processes as opposed to the other side of the continent, yeah? Our music sounds similar too, so there's similarities there, and there's commonalities in our dances and the way we do it. So it's an incredibly powerful tool for language learning and retaining that. There's been quite a few songs that we've used in like kindergartens, prep 1, 2, 3, that whole sort of age group. I think they can become quite strong language learners, and particularly when you might take a format where you create new songs, and most of the song is in English, but you can take that opportunity to find the most important parts and implement your language. It might be a place name song, or it might be a song about animals, like the one I did recently. A friend of mine, faith-based, and wrote the song No Buru on the Bus, and that was an incredible tool for myself and others because she was generous enough to gift it to us. So she wrote it and put in her Yugambeh words, but then gave it to us and other communities, and we could put our words in there, and we could use that as a hands-on resource to go into different places, spaces, schools, and the rest of it. The impact was really valuable. I also had this opportunity, was presented to me through First Languages Australia and the ABC, and it was a fantastic collaboration where different language holders and musicians from around the country were able to sing a song in language. And I wouldn't call myself a musician or a good singer for that matter, but do it for the cause. And the cause is the love of language and sharing that more broadly. And I do that to try and encourage as much of my mob as possible to get up and give it a go too, because that's what I say. Well, if I can do it, so can everyone else. So it was a great collaboration, and I was able to sing that song, No Buru on the Bus, and they videoed it, and it has great popularity. It was spread around the place on ABC iView. There was a teaching resource put out for schools. It was even on ABC Kids. I know I got a message the other day from one of my cousins who's got her baby, and it just popped up on the TV, so it was quite a surprise for them too. I think the importance of that is when I was a child growing up watching things on TV or going to school, or our languages weren't featured in many places and spaces, and that's important because while it's incredibly important that we are able to see ourselves within that, see ourselves within society every day, instead of being the bit extra or off to the side, by definition marginalized. The rise or the appetite that there is now to see more language in public spaces, to hear it, and this is coming from a time where old people weren't able to speak their language in public spaces or sing those songs, or practice ceremony. So to see that is changing now, although the damage is done and we're working to recoup from that, but to see the appetite now is incredibly important for us. I think it gives a stronger sense of identity to young blackfellas coming up, and I only wish I was exposed to a lot more of that in an everyday setting. Sure, we had our own family and cultural upbringings, but when you went to school, when you went to other sort of public things with your friends and the rest of it, you'd leave your backpack at the door, is the analogy. That backpack that you accumulate all of that cultural knowledge and all of that understanding over time. Well, wasn't welcome in the classroom when I went to school, and I'm not that old. I think it's incredibly important. And I also, when I went back into schools, I was aware of that when I had the opportunity to go back and teach language and songs to students in the classroom. I always thought, I wish someone had come into my classroom and did the same for me. In terms of language revitalization, it's not an easy process. There's a strong, consistent community of practice, dedicated blackfellas and non-Indigenous people too, who are helping us along this journey. But it takes real time and effort, and it's not easy. There's a lot of challenges. One of the challenges that I always say is the fact that our languages are so widely dispersed all over the place. We don't know exactly where they all are, and that's a real barrier in terms of finding them. And they go through this extremely subjective process where they're vetted by non-Indigenous people, in many cases, non-Indigenous people who don't have the training, the skills, or the competency to really discern what is appropriate in this space. And I find a lot of, and sure, there's sensitive materials that are in there, and that's a legitimate concern, but that's our community's concern to work out, right? I think because of lack of competency in that area when it comes to sensitive information, there's a real fragility around it, and that the default response for some are to just lock it all down. And I can't say that without saying that there's a lot of institutions now who have very quickly become aware of that and are doing absolutely everything they can to not be the arbiters of access and not lock materials down, because they know at the end of the day it doesn't help us do what we need to do, because we don't have the time. The time goes on, our old people are dying from preventable diseases and the rest of it. We're dying at a lot lower age than probably we should be, and time is a real factor. Those old people who do have memories of that anthropologist who came around and recorded in the 60s, or that, those people are getting really old now. And so it's important that we do, in the interest of revitalizing language, and to do that to suit our priorities for once. That's the biggest difference, to take that material and develop what we want as it. That's a big deal. There's also challenges now tying it in. It all gets tied into a bit of a knot now. We move to open access to material, and then we have the rise of generative AI now. I see an example very recently where 3 or more Indigenous languages had grammars made openly available in the interests of communities accessing them and using them. And that has been exploited by generative AI in scraping that data to produce books, which, as I speak today, are currently available on Amazon for $60 a book. There's one example. I believe they're trying to sort that out, but it's a really tricky space. There's no black and white answer to all of this. And it's something that I see very clearly within my journey, particularly with LDACA, and something that we're really trying to make sense of and walk this 1 foot at a time and try and make the most informed and conscionable decisions that we can make, really knowing that impacts communities and where communities' voices lie within that. And the power comes, the great strength comes, we know, is when you get blackfellas into those collections and working with those materials, and they enrich those documents, videos, songs, transcripts, the rest of it. They enrich that in ways that non-Indigenous people simply can't, because they don't have that backpack that they carry from home full of all of those cultural and family upbringings. And that probably should be said and should be acknowledged in this conversation moving forward. I'll say too that music is an incredibly powerful tool in preserving our languages, because it always has been, right? We've always been great storytellers, and as time has progressed, a lot of these songs and dances are talking about specific events, points in times, and just stories for entertainment and other purposes. So we're incredibly social people. That's what we are as human beings. I think music resonates with anyone, regardless of where you come from. So in that sense, it's an incredibly powerful tool, and it's an incredibly powerful tool for sharing our languages with other cultures too. In terms of what defines contemporary music or what defines traditional music, that's really difficult to define, because, as I said, over time, stories keep coming. They're made up. They've maybe based on real events. They may be based on law as well. So there's all of these different categories to consider, or I won't say categories. There's all these different, I guess, unique aspects to consider in terms of that role. I think what's most important is where it comes from, and if these works are created by the language holders, by the descendants of that group, I think who's to categorize it any other way than the way that group intends to, because it's our language, it's for us, and should we choose to share it, we'll pick the appropriate medium to do that. But music certainly is consistently one of the most powerful tools to do that.